Designing for the Masses is Out with David Peschel from Spec Design is the fourth in a series of 5 webinars concluding next month on November 19th. Today's webinar includes a 30-minute presentation followed by a question and answer period. This is your webinar. It's intended to be interactive and an exchange of information and ideas. So we encourage you to type questions into the questions box as they come to you. At the end of the 30-minute presentation, David will be answering your questions in the order that they're received. Designers know that there's a direct correlation between good design and business success, but defining and quantifying the specifics of how good design positively impacts business success can often prove challenging. This series is designed to shed light on the interconnectedness of business and design and how you can transfer your design skills into the business world. IDSA is delighted to introduce David Peschel, who will be explaining how the design paradigm is shifting. Today's culture is moving away from design for the masses and towards individualized products that connect deeply with targeted users. In the past, this was the work of highly skilled craftsmen, but the next phase in design evolution will hinge on advancing technologies, resulting in products made for someone, not everybody. David will also explore the exchange of quality versus quantity and the emergence of populist design. David Peschel is the Executive Creative Director of Spec Design and serves as advocate for the collaborative design practices between all divisions of Spec Design. With more than 20 years of award-winning, real-world idea experience at design studios like Smart Design, IDEO, Frog Design, and Michael Graves Design Group, David has worked with a range of clients such as OXO, Nike, Juniper Networks, Target, and Stryker Medical. He's lectured at Stanford's D School and served as an adjunct professor at CCA. So, without further ado, I turn the mic over to David to share with you how designing for the masses is out.
Hi, thanks everybody for coming. My name is David, as you just heard. First of all, I'd like to start off by thanking the IDSA and Spec Design for making this event possible. I'd also like to thank all of the different educators and design teams that I've worked with over the years, and I thank you for the knowledge that you've given me and the support, and also thanks to the clients who have put up with me and the different design teams, and especially if you've been one of those more daring clients that's willing to try new things and push the boundaries. Thank you for that. And then I want to do a special shout out to Paul Bradley, one of my mentors. I'm totally inspired by you, and thank you for everything. All right, so here we go. All right, so a little quick something about me personally. I grew up in an interesting background in a household that my father was in the Coast Guard. He ended up retiring as an admiral in the Coast Guard. He was a helicopter pilot, and my mother was an interior designer. So I call this the conflict of chintz and the chain of command. In that, in one sense, there were a lot of rules and regulations coming through being involved with the military. My father wore a uniform to work every day. We lived in government housing. We moved quite a bit. And then my mother was very interested in aesthetics, in antiques, in the way people lived, in the homes, and furnishings around us. This is a quick outline of my work experience. As you heard in the bio, I had the opportunity of working with a variety of different consulting groups. And in terms of education, interestingly, I started off as a fine art major going to Wayne State University in Detroit, and I was a ceramic major. I did pottery and ceramics. I was very interested in that all the way through high school, and eventually became the resident potter at the Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield, Michigan. And from there, after 2 years at Wayne State, I moved on to the Rhode Island School of Design as a ceramic major. I worked in that program for a little over a year, and finally I was steered by Jackie Rice, the head of the ceramic department then. She saw some of the work I was doing in fine arts and ceramics, and I was actually in the middle of making all of the beer tap handles for Harpoon Ale, which was a startup brewery in Boston. I had met Rich Doyle, the president of Harpoon, and they had commissioned me to slip cast 1,000 beer tap handles. She kind of looked at me and she said, "Dave, there's this program called Industrial Design, which is down the hall, and I think maybe you ought to go talk to them." So my fine art career after many years, shifted over to an industrial design education while I was at RISD, and I ended up graduating with both a Bachelor of Industrial Design as well as a BFA with a concentration in ceramics from Rhode Island School of Design. So now I want to tell a couple quick stories. Once I graduated from RISD, I left Providence with a ton of enthusiasm in that summer of 1989. I got in my dad's old pickup truck and I was going to drive it across the country to deliver it to him in Seattle. So I took my portfolio with me. I had it in the truck and I literally drove across the country and went from city to city, and I interviewed at some of the larger design studios and companies at the time. Design Logic was one in Chicago. I stopped at Nike. I went to Esprit in San Francisco. Frog Design down here in the peninsula area near Palo Alto. And eventually I ended up in Seattle. And I had an interview with some guys who worked at a fairly large design group up in Seattle. And they did a lot of work with airlines and Boeing, people like that. And I was very excited. This was one of the last interviews. At the end of it, after I went through all the ideas and the portfolio, the presentation, the two guys looked at me and they had this very sort of blank stare, and they said this quote, "You seem like an idea walking around looking for a place to happen." And then they said, "We don't really need that. What we need here is problem solvers." And I took that really hard. It was a blow to me, and I felt like I had let them down, and I felt like I had let myself down. And then I was like, gosh, I am a problem solver. That's how I think. But I realized at that point that I was really coming at them and talking about ideas and not about problems and how I would solve them. So for the next 20 or so years, I took that very seriously, and I always approached the design problems much from a problem solver perspective. Then the next story, this isn't a picture of the actual woman that I'll be talking about. This is someone else's mom, Yuka's mother-in-law. I was in an airport with the folks from Michael Graves, and at the time we were working with Stryker on a transport chair project, which is now public. And as I was waiting in the gate area, there was a woman that was sitting waiting to board the plane, and she was sitting in a wheelchair that had a broken leg rest. So she had both of her legs resting on one of the leg rests of her wheelchair. So I walked up to her and I just started talking. And I said, "Hi, my name's David. I'm a designer. I'm working on things similar to your wheelchair. Can you tell me a little bit about it?" We just got into this really interesting dialogue between her and her caregiver, which was her husband, who was the person who often pushed her around in the wheelchair. And we started talking. And it was very great talk. And after about 15 minutes, we were going to board the plane. And I said, "Okay, so before you go, let me just ask you a question. If you could have anything done to your wheelchair, or you could have the best wheelchair in the world, what would it be?" And again, her wheelchair was broken, her leg rest didn't work, it was old, it was worn out, and she just looked at me kind of with this, this introspective glare, and she said, "If I could have anything I wanted for a wheelchair, it would say New York Giants on the back of the seat." And it just struck me, that how unique this was, that here was a person who's immobile pretty much, really dependent on this piece of equipment, and to her, the ultimate would be a wheelchair that would express her interest in a sports team and her passion to communicate that to the rest of the world. It wasn't about ergonomics, it wasn't about comfort, it was really about her personal expression. So that then struck me as sort of the opposite of those two gentlemen that told me that they didn't need ideas, that they needed problem solvers. So this talk then really comes out of those two experiences and how I think we can use both of them together to do new design and think toward the future. So in the 25 plus years of designing, I ask myself often, what is good design? And, here's some pictures of items that I've had the opportunity on working on with the different design teams in different companies, and all of them, most of them have received some type of an award or have done well in the marketplace. And when I think about those different items, or I think about just the term good design, words like this come up to me, which appropriate, beautiful, clever, functional, innovative. And those are all great, and I think they do provide, if you can achieve those different qualities in a design, you most likely have done a good design. But now I'm starting to think deeper about, maybe it's because I'm getting older, or I'm seeing more and more good design out there in the market, and I'm wondering, okay, so what makes a really great design, or what makes a design classic and enduring? What makes a design that lasts over the ages and through time, where people tend to still appreciate it and buy it and use it, and it doesn't necessarily need to be dropped and we move on to something else. So when I look for words that start to articulate what an enduring classic design is to me, words come up more like memorable and meaningful, timeless, enduring, important, and provocative. So these words are, it's a subtle difference between the words for good design, which are listed below those. But I think these are important differences that we can look to for direction as we move forward. So some of you might be thinking, right, well, who cares? Who cares about doing longer lasting, enduring design? And it's like, well, first of all, I do. I think from my background of being more of an artist and a craftsman that moved into design, I'm very interested in touching people at more of an emotional level, about communicating stories and about inspiring people to think about what they do on a daily basis. So for me, that touch point is through the products that we design, and how can I put things in people's hands or in their environments that add to this emotional experience. Then as a designer, I'd really like to solve problems, and I'd like to make things that work better, and I'd like to make things that last longer. All of these, they get back to that problem-solving challenge, but it's about, ecology, and it's about saving resources, and it's about making things cost-effective for folks, and giving them choices that they can use for a long time. So that brings me to the hypothesis, which is the title of this talk, which is design for the masses is out. I'm not saying that I don't want the masses to have design. I think design for the masses is still very appropriate and is needed. But designing to the masses, I think we should give them design, but I don't think that we should necessarily design for the mass. I think we should design more for individuals. So enduring iconic designs have often been designed for a specific person or event. And this is something that I just sort of thought of one day, or I started kicking it around with colleagues as we were discussing things, and that kind of inspired this discussion. So we started looking around at iconic designs to try to prove out this hypothesis. And then I also think that enduring iconic designs tend to form an emotional bond with the specific person that those designs were intended for, or through that specific event that those designs were meant for. And then over time, those designs then create more of a bond with the general population at large. So I think different people, like Nike, in a way uses this philosophy through the experience I have with them and working with them, that they often will design for the elite athlete, they design for their needs, they design for their events, and then they like to have those high-end, extreme functioning devices then trickle down and move into the mainstream and become sort of foundational products from which they can then build collections around. And I think some of that learning is what also helped me come to this determination that great enduring design is often started by thinking of an individual or an individual event. So here at SPEC, we have our definition of innovation is change that creates value. But when we talk about that, change that creates value, there are many different ways of creating value. There's monetary value, which to me is more quantitative, and you can count the dollars. You can see if your designs are better and more successful in the marketplace. But then there's also qualitative value, and that's where we're getting to the notion of enduring. Like, do the designs stand the test of time? Do they tend to fulfill the emotional need as well as the physical functional need that people have for devices or products throughout the change in trends and materials and technologies. What allows something to hold on and have this qualitative value as well as quantitative value? And to this point, I think it's becoming more and more understood, at least here it is at Spec Design, that there are more than, just a few ways of knowing things. In the past, everybody understood, and again, it gets to that idea of we don't need people with ideas, we need problem solvers. It's about there being head solutions or sense solutions, that things either made sense in your head, they made monetary sense, they made technical sense, they made manufacturing sense, or they made sense through your senses, so they felt right, the ergonomics were right, the balance was right, it sounded right. But now we're starting to learn that things could also make sense through your heart and your gut, that designers were, a lot of us, I think that's why we're drawn to design, and even the fine artists and craftspeople, is because we tend to have an ability to tune into what we feel from the heart and what we feel from the gut. We can go out and talk to people and get a good sense of what the world needs or what user groups need to solve their problems and move them forward both physically and emotionally. So then part of the hypothesis is that enduring designs tend to work the heart and gut muscles more so than they do the head and sense muscles. So none of these things I can say are proven. Again, they're all my opinion or the opinion of the folks that I kick these ideas around with. And I hope at the end of this we can have some questions and answers that sort of challenge this, or we can kick the idea around a little bit and see where it goes. So I heard a quote one time on the radio that was that hope is the ability, or hope is the desire to achieve something which we can't currently see. And when I heard that quote, I thought, wow, that's very similar to the conversation that we often have with clients after we go through our initial project brief or the plan that we have for a project. And they're often like, well, how are we going to get from the research through the concepts into ideas that really matter? And I know it's not something that clients want to hear, but I'm also like, well, you have to have hope. You have to have hope that we're going to get through this and we're going to turn these more abstract ideas into actionable things that we can then design toward and solve for both the physical and emotional needs. So then I've converted that quote into this one, which is design is the tool to achieve something which we can't currently see. So in a way, I think design is a way that we can help make sense out of the things that we feel and sense through our gut and our heart. So if this is the case, how can we try to make our designs more enduring and connect at a heart and gut level? So now I'll show you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about, where design was done specifically for a person or for an event. So on the left, this is Philip Johnson's glass house. There was a lot of controversy around this house when it came out because it was in direct conflict with Mies van der Rohe's house, which was being built in Michigan. Outside of Chicago. But at the same time, it's something that was done for Philip Johnson himself. He designed this house as an exploration, and it's not just this house, but it's the entire compound. There's another house right across from this that's brick and very solid and very dense and massive. But this house, to me, is a great example of somebody designing something as a personal expression of something they're interested in trying, and it therefore becomes a moment in time and history that we can all look at and learn from, and it influenced architecture and the way residential buildings were done from that point forward. Next to that is a collection for Alessi by Michael Graves. I had the honor of working directly with Michael and Donald and the team there for 8 years. I didn't work directly on this collection, but I heard a lot about it. And although this collection wasn't designed specifically for a person, I've been told, but the collection before it the tea service that was part of the folly or the exhibition that Alberto Alessi commissioned by several architects was very much done as a personal exploration between Alberto and the team of architects that he commissioned to explore the notion of service settings, the tea ceremony. And then I think what Michael was able to do through that learning is transform the breakfast ritual from what to many was the simple act of putting a pot on a stove and boiling some water in a small saucepan into the celebration of the day and the morning, and the courage that he had to actually put a whimsical item like a bird on the end of a commercially made tea kettle. I applaud, and I think it created the charm and character which has made this Alessi kettle still the #1 item in the Alessi collection to this day in terms of sales. The Barcelona chair in the lower left by Mies van der Rohe, again, was a chair that we all know. It's not the most comfortable chair, but it stands out. It stands the test of time as sort of as an icon and an enduring classic. And interestingly, this chair was actually designed for the German pavilion in Spain, and it was intended to be a chair that the King and Queen of Spain would sit in as they welcomed guests in the German pavilion. So I find it very interesting that something that could be designed for such a specific moment and event could then, through several iterations, and there were some design changes, change of manufacturing, change of materials, but it still holds together today as an expression of the time and an experimentation of balance and of form and of line that I think comes from a deep place that I'm just pointing out that it was done for a specific moment. And then the OXO items, these are some of the items from the original collection of OXO. Again, I had the chance of working on some of the things that went on this handle, but the handle was done before I started working at Smart Design in New York. But I was there in the studio and saw Sam and Betsy Farber and their son come into the studio and work directly with David and Tucker and Tom and everybody there at Smart. And I saw them trying the devices. I saw them discussing the benefits of the form. And I remember when the handle was white before it became black, and how they actually had these dialogues with the direct client, with the direct user. And that drove a lot of the decisions that were made as this collection was brought to life. So where do we go from here? If broad, long-lasting appeal can be driven by this bespoke design intent, and technology is allowing us to do just about whatever we want right now, meaning, we're coming to the end of terms like undercut, and that's not possible. Really, with the right minds and the right manufacturers and the right machinery, we're pretty much able to do just about whatever we want. The one interesting thing, and I'm not going to get into this right now today, but the one place that this argument starts falling apart that I have about bespoke intent is when you start combining objects that have software, embedded software and technology, as well as the hardware. Most of the examples that I showed on this slide, actually all of them, none of them have a technology component that's driven by a screen or technology. So that's something that we could discuss, or that's something that I look forward to seeing in the future, are these long-lasting, enduring designs that actually include an on-screen interface that doesn't make the item obsolete. So the conclusion is, let's stop designing for the mass or anyone, and let's start designing for the individual. To me, this was a difficult thing to come to terms with, because in my design education, we were often told it was bad to design for yourself, that you shouldn't ever put yourself in the center of a design problem. You should always design for others. Then through many years of working where we did research and we talked to users, and then I noticed that a lot of great design is done for specific individuals. I'm starting to wonder if that really is the case. So I see things happening in the marketplace right now, such as mass customization, and is that what I'm talking about, and is that the answer? And quite honestly, I'd say it's about halfway there. It's interesting, but I don't think that Nike's iDesign program is quite enough. I think choosing from a variety of options is really not quite as deep as what I'm talking about. I think that true bespoke design intent is really designing every item, every element of an item, if possible, intently for an individual or a specific event. Etsy, I think, is a great example of an internet-based craft fair, in a way, that's starting to allow design to get to people in a variety of locations with a variety of needs. So my wife, for instance, we have a new dog that's an interesting shape. It's part Dachshund and part Chihuahua. And we needed a jacket for it, so we couldn't find one. So my wife Chrissy went on to Etsy, and she found someone in Lithuania who was knitting sweaters for dogs, and she specialized in Dachshunds. And so we wrote her and we sent our dog's dimensions, and next thing you know, in the mail we get this custom-made sweater in our color to our dog's dimensions with the number of buttons that we specified. And there it is, so that was an item that we end up getting through the new social network that's available that designers are able to use to reach customers. In the future, I see personal designers moving away from the world of fashion and home design. So personal stylists, I feel we're actually going back to the days when kings and queens had court designers, where you might have Leonardo da Vinci design a stairway for your new mansion. I know that sounds potentially a bit elitist, but as design is more and more accessible to more and more people, and people can start printing or building their own objects, I can imagine personal designers designing any aspect of any person's life and helping them get the car of their dreams or the sweater that fits just right. Then AI platforms, I think, are something that are interesting and starting to pop up more and more. So these are the ability to design websites or scrapbooks or things that are almost automatically generated dependent on the parameters that you specify and the content that you provide, and then it starts taking those inputs and generating designs that it thinks are going to be appropriate to you. So again, this is sort of like mass customization. It's part of the answer, but then I think personal designers could take these beginnings and start then tweaking them and tuning them to really have them be driven more at a personal level for the individual. I don't know that every individual is quite ready yet to, I don't know that my mom and dad are ready yet to take AI platforms and mass customization and really work with it. Maybe designers need to be the go-between for the next year or two to help people understand the power they have to design items for themselves or control what's around them. So these are the tools that I see as sort of the toolkit for designing for individuals. So one is we can design for ourselves. Don't be afraid to put yourself in the center of the equation. If you don't have someone else to design for, like Philip Johnson, design a house for yourself and maybe it can reach people in a deeper way. Another thing you can do is you can design for a cause. So I was talking to Paul Bradley about this the other day. So he was like, well, Dave, I do this, but I would often design for a brand, not for an individual, but I'd be designing toward Coca-Cola or designing toward whoever our client was and trying to make sure that the design fit for them. And in a way, I think that fits this directive. You can design for a cause, like Naoto Fukuzawa is designing toward a cause of without thought. To me, by designing without thought, you are in a way designing for a specific event or person. So you're doing what I'm talking about, but in a more abstract way. And I think that that's a way to get to these deeper meanings. You can design for someone, maybe not yourself, but you can go into research and pick somebody to design for, or you can generate personas and personalities that you design for and around. So there are ways of making people up that you then design to, and I feel in a way that that then creates designs that could hold greater meaning and have deeper emotional connections and function to other users who maybe weren't within the persona group to begin with. And then here at Spec Design, we have something that we call experience engineering, which is a way of designing toward people and user groups where we're constantly asking, how will this design make people feel if we do it? But more importantly, how will it make them feel about themselves? So if we execute design A, will it have a deeper impact on the way people feel about themselves than if we did B? And if so, would A be a better choice, even though it might be a little bit more uncomfortable or a little scarier up front, but in the end it may give people the feeling that they're looking for in terms of being reassured or confident in what they're doing. So for a better chance at connecting to the mass market in a lasting and enduring way, try designing for someone next time instead of designing for anyone. So that's the end of the talk. I'd like to thank everybody, and we're going to open it up for discussion now. So feel free to send in a question. Okay, so I'm going to read one. What do you do when a client disagrees with your approach? All right, well, first thing I would say is I don't think that there, in the design process, that there are really any right or wrong approaches. The one I'm offering up is just an approach, and something that I'd like to get dialogue and discussion about. So the first thing I would do if somebody said, well, I don't agree with your approach, well, I would turn that around and I would say, well, what is your approach then? And I would try to learn from that, because again, that's part of what they're personally looking for from this design experience. So if I'm going to design directly for that client, then I want to know what makes them tick. And I want to understand what it is that they think is important about that. Eventually, I would imagine I could start asking enough questions or probing into what they're looking for that it would begin to give us direction and places where we could go to design in the next phases that might get to this deeper level of meaning. So in a way, they become the person that we're designing for, and we just listen and learn. Okay, so the next question I have here is, do you think there's still any place for mass design that appeals to everyone? Will there remain certain products that never become individualized? And I'd say, of course, absolutely. Just today as I was driving to work, I'm sitting at a stop sign and I was looking out of my window as I'm sitting there, and there's this beautiful view of the mountains along 280. And in between me and the mountains was a chain link fence that was separating the street from a grassy meadow. I look at that chain link fence. It's not really beautiful. It's not really inspiring. It tells me something about protecting deer. It tells me something about keeping people out of that space. It's black. It was painted or an epoxy coated material. But I think, will chain link fence be customized and designed for an individual or specific event? And I think, well, probably not. But I suddenly remembered a chain link overpass that I saw as I was driving through Arizona a couple of months ago along the highway, and they had taken the chain link and they had cut the top profile of the chain link so that it represented the mountaintops of the mountains range that was in the distance. And at one point, as I was driving down the mountains, that chain link fence almost matched up with the mountains in the background. And I thought for an instant, wow, did that designer pick that spot and design the fence to match, or was it just a coincidence? So that's an instance where you take a common material and you use it in a novel or customized way for that moment and that place. And it had very deep meaning to me, and I'll never think of chain link fence in the same way. I think that, architects are able to do that when they surround their home with chain link fence and it suddenly brings different meaning to it. All right, do we have any others? Okay, within this more customized market, how do you ensure that people are getting what they're expecting? If you purchase a non-custom item and it's not what you expect, you're dismayed. If you purchase a custom item and it's not what you expect, the negative experience is likely more pronounced. How do you minimize or eliminate that on a larger scale? Well, that's a great question. And what I would hope is that the solution that you come up with, as designers, I think that we are always going to be looking for ways to temper the customization so that it would be appropriate to a larger audience. So that means trying to make something, and I think OXO Good Grips is a great example of that, where it's a handle that did appeal to Betsy and Sam Farber. It did address her arthritic condition. It helped her with the grip. At the same time, I think the team there was looking at a handle that wasn't necessarily too medical looking. They were interested in using a new material, which was Sanaprene at the time, which is coming out and was a new food safe material that was injection moldable. So they were interested in many things at the time, and those all came together to make an item that, while addressing the Farber's needs and desires, it also was opening it up to a broader appeal. So I think we just have to try to look at both as we're designing. Here's another one. What's the process for identifying head and sense feeling versus heart and gut feelings? That's a great question. And it reminds me of an example. A colleague of mine, Ant Creed, once described this in a meeting while I was at IDEO. He was talking to somebody about designing irons while he was at Philips. So these are hand irons for the ironing market in Europe. And he said that while they went out and did research, they didn't do a lot of research about, or they did do general research where they were looking at how people ironed, where did they keep their irons, where did they actually do the ironing during the day. But toward the end of the interviews, they started probing people around questions about, well, what is it about ironing that you really need? What is it about ironing that makes you happy? What is it about ironing that delights you? Or what is it about your current iron that you don't like, not in terms of style or function, but really what's it not giving you? And people started talking about a lot of things revolving around speed. That ironing took too much time, that it took too long to set up, it took too long for the irons to heat up, it took then too long to do the ironing process, and then once you were done, the iron took too long to cool down, and so you couldn't really put it away, so you ended up leaving it out, and it became an eyesore, and people could trip over it, blah, 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 this ongoing thing. So the directive that he took out of that and then gave to the design team as the number one challenge is, let's make irons that look fast. So the designers went off, and you can chime in if you're listening and you have more to say about that. But from what I understood, they then went off and they designed irons that tried to encourage a feeling of speed. And that could be a speed at any level and in any one of those different functions that I mentioned. But all in all, they needed to communicate speed. So once they had concepts, they went back out into the field and they looked for, as they talked to people about the concepts, they looked for not I like this or I liked that, but they were looking for comments that related to the designs communicating a sense of efficiency and speed. And the ones that did are the ones that they then move forward with through the design process. So I think in terms of gut and heart feel, we often have it when we are designers and we hear what people are talking about, or we have a sense of what we think the market needs. But if you get more of an emotional take from consumers and users about what they need from products at a heart level, at a gut level, and not just, well, I want one that's less expensive or I want one that doesn't hurt my wrist, I think you'll start tapping into more of these emotional drivers that drive long-lasting use. Okay, are services like, here's another question, are services like Kickstarter and project funding platforms helpful in creating individualized products, or are they a mixed blessing as you give up some control for money? And I think this gets back to one of the later slides I have where it talked about mass customization or things like Etsy. I think these are great beginnings, and I think what they help is they help create the dialogue, or like Tucker Viemeister has been saying for years, we're all designers. And I just don't think enough people understand that we have the ability to design the world around us. So I think any sort of crowdsourced platforms where people can get behind what they think are good designs and what they think are good new architectural platforms or initiatives is a great thing. The responsibility then falls on us as the sort of alchemists of this data and all of this information is what do we then do with it? How do we then convert these raw ideas into great, valuable, value-adding designs? Things that have both quantitative and qualitative benefit. I think Quirky, in a way, is going through some of this growing pain right now, where some of the ideas that they get, I think, are great ideas, but then at the same time, they end up, I'm not trying to put down Quirky at all. I love what they're doing, but some of the ideas sort of tend to be driven by a mass populace approach, and they're a little commodity. They don't feel connected enough to me. And I often see some of those items in the TJ Maxx checkout lane or places where I see products that I feel like, quickly found the end of their run in a retail environment and didn't sell well or are on clearance. My experience of working with Target is when things are on clearance, it means they didn't do that well. So that's always a signal of enduring design to me and what worked and what didn't work. And then, how does your background in fine art influence your day-to-day work? I think I went through that a little bit at the beginning of the presentation, and then I think there's just a balance of allowing your personal ideas and your personal, we as designers, I think, we're like big hard drives walking around out in the world where we look, we read, we listen, and we capture and we store all of this information inside us. And then when we're given design problems or we talk to people with deep needs, I think we then start referencing all of this information that's stored inside us, and we start putting it to use in the form of concepts and the form of designs. I feel like that's why brainstorming is such a great tool, because in a way it's accessing these hard drives in a very unbiased way, and it's allowing people to just dump the subconscious connections that they've made as designers and artists and out into a creative environment, and then it's up to the leaders of that brainstorm to sort of make sense of those ideas and try to run them through the proper filters like experience engineering that we use here at Spec Design to make sense and to try to turn those raw ideas into really valuable designs for our clients. So as artists, I think they have the freedom of just seeing, digesting, and then throwing those ideas back out at people in whatever form they like. Sometimes they're very controversial and very provocative. They don't try to always temper the expression the way designers do, but I'm seeing through the use of technology and mass communication, what the internet's providing, I'm seeing definitely a convergence of the design world with what I feel is the art and creative craft world. I think they're crashing together at an accelerating speed, at least in my mind, and there's a real great opportunity to start collaborating more with creative thinkers, artistic design thinkers, sculptors, writers, poets, and how can we take that thinking and use it in design of products and environments to make more meaningful, lasting design and experiences for people around us. So I think we've got 5 or 15 minutes left. If we have any last questions that want to come through, I'd love to take them. Okay, so what advice would you give to your younger self or someone just starting out when facing rejection? Well, in my career, I've had the opportunity to work at a lot of great design offices, and I thank all of the people that gave me those chances. At the same time, I've been rejected from several design opportunities. I remember sitting in that same cross-country trip. I interviewed at Nike with Tinker Hatfield and the team there. It was a very small group at Nike at the time, working out of small industrial buildings. And I blew that interview in a big way. And I look back because I don't think I really clearly understood yet what value I, as a thinker and a designer, could bring to a project and to a program. And at that time, I think I really was talking more about blue sky ideas, and I was an idea walking around looking for a place to happen. And I didn't understand how that idea at the time could relate to the designing of shoes. I didn't yet understand that Nike had their eyes and visions on fully integrated product systems that included software and hardware, and that they were interested in clothing and devices and helping people stay fit, and that they were going to build environments like Nike Towns that would give people this incredible sense of performance and the way a brand could transform. At that time, museums, were the place you went for an experience, not a retail environment. So they really, blew me away with what they did with Nike as an expert in designing shoes and prototyping shoes. So I would say, as a young designer, look around, try to figure out how your strengths can be used toward the momentum of where the different partners that you're trying to work with, either the clients or the places where you'd like to try to work. How can your skills best enhance what they're doing? Ask them what they have in mind 2 years out, 3 years out, and try to think of how you might be able to contribute to that momentum and that place. Okay, here's one last question. What techniques do you use to get the user needs, insights of the targeted consumer? That's a great question. So there are a lot of different tools that we use, and in experience engineering, a very important tool is journey mapping, where you start breaking activities down into manageable chunks. So if you have a very complicated task, such as going on vacation, this is one that we used to use at Michael Graves while I was there. If you're going on vacation, there are all these different elements to that. First, you have to go out and you have to find a piece of luggage. So there's the shopping experience. Then there is the act of packing. How do people pack? You have to think through the trip. You have to spread your clothes out on the bed. How can we help with that process? Then you have to get all the stuff into the bag. Then you've got to get that bag into your car. Then you've got to get from your house or your apartment to the airport. How does that happen? Are you in a cab? Are you in your car? Are you in a bus? Where does your bag end up going? Are you separated from your items? These are all opportunities to start digging into people about, where do you feel anxiety about the process? Where do you feel a lack of control? Where do you feel really confident? Where do you feel like your luggage or your bag could give you more than it's giving you right now? Where are you feeling like you want New York Giants to be communicated to everybody that you encounter in that trip? Where are you looking for those moments of self-expression? Where are you looking to be anonymous? Where are you looking to not stand out and just have your bag be as quiet and simple as possible. So all of these different pushes and pulls are opportunities when you start doing research. If you can pick the problem apart and start talking to users about the different elements and the different moments of that process, you'll get an unbelievably rich amount of information about how you can connect more deeply at a gut and heart level to your user. Okay, and one more. With new technology, integrated computer, touchscreens, and looking at iconic or long-lasting design product, do you think high-end technology in the long run will stand as long as, say, a 1957 Chevy, or something hard and fast can be brought back to life after many years of love and uses? That's a great example. And it's something I'm looking for. I'm looking for examples of where technology, or there is a technology that hasn't made something obsolete, right? So I have a 59 Chevy, believe it or not. It's the first car that I was given by my great-grandmother when I was 16 years old. And frankly, it sits in my garage now, and I don't use it a lot because it doesn't have anti-lock brakes. It doesn't have seat belts. It doesn't have even seat backs that lock into position. So if you slam on the brakes, the seat backs flop forward. It has a metal dash. It doesn't have power steering. So I don't feel safe in driving it, and I don't feel like it's safe for me in terms of bringing it out on the road and endangering the lives of those around me. So I've heard that there are companies doing things now where you can send them your classic car and they'll upgrade it and they'll put new electric technology in it and make it an electric vehicle. They'll make it safe. They'll put airbags in it. They might put a stereo in it. So I think there are ways for me to maintain the love and the history that I feel for that car, but would bring it up to date. The question is right now with me is, can I afford that? Or is that service available to me now? I think I could have it done. The question is, how accessible is that? So that might be our design challenges. How do we bring updating older products with new functionality to the masses in terms of expense? So my iPhone updates all the time through software updates. My computer now starts to update itself too. So I love the fact that I don't have to update my hardware as often as we used to have to, that the hardware is capable of lasting longer and longer until it just isn't possible, and the company needs to move forward with a new connector so that they can then get more functionality or a better camera or something else into a device. I understand at some point trade-offs have to be made and the hardware has to change. But I love the fact that more and more companies are trying to let products last longer through remote updates through the software and firmware. So I think that's it. IDSA, if you want to close up, I thank everybody for coming and appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, David. So that does wrap up our question and answer period. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Keep an eye out for a follow-up email from IDSA that will include a very, very brief 3-question survey about the webinar. Your answers are really important to us, and we will be using them to determine content and direction of future webinars. So please just take a minute to give us your feedback. You'll also be receiving information about accessing today's complete webinar online at idsa.org. We hope you join us for the next installment in Good Design Equals Good Business. That is called Constrain to Create, Why Parameters Boost Design Creativity, and will be on November 19th at 1 p.m. with David Strum, who is the Senior Vice President, Product Design at Michael Graves Design. Strum will explore how design constraints can actually inspire creativity. So thank you all for joining us, and we hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.